Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
And today we have such a special guest here. We're going to be welcoming a good friend of mine, Justine Pomerance, to the podcast to talk a lot about her journey as an athlete and also her journey completing the Boston Marathon 5 months after giving birth to her son, Leo, who we're all really excited about. But before we do that, I think we'll jump into our coaching and training insights, which is how we love to start all of our episodes. And Elena, do you want to take the first one?
Sure, yeah. I would say that my coaching and training insight recently is, as an athlete, just thinking through the goal of the workout that you have for that day. And the reason why I find that important is because you can then use that information and mix that with how your body feels and make the right decision. And that can go either by doing more or doing less. I'll give an example. This past weekend, it was like my last big weekend for a big, long ultra race. And I knew that the most important thing was time on feet, but I was not feeling very good at all. And when I thought about that, I was like, maybe I should just, quit now early and not overdo it. But then I was like, well, if it's really just time on feet, pace can just go totally out the window. I can make this just an adventure day, just be out there for a long time and practice that mental side of like keeping going and just keep moving. And that's what I did. And I'm really glad I made that decision. But then there's also been days when, the goal of the workout is just to get some easy recovery miles. And I might have said 6 to 8 and I'm only feeling 3 to 4. And so I do that because I know that I'm just trying to get moving that day. So just have a sense of why you're doing what you're doing and mix that with how you're feeling. And I know that it can take some experience, but don't hesitate at all to reach out to your coach to ask why something's on the calendar, or if you don't have a coach, do a little research and just get a good sense of why you're doing what you're doing.
I love that. Yeah, this taps into this whole idea of really just being able to listen to your body, which we know is a skill that we can kind of build over time. But flexing that muscle and saying like, hey, I'm not actually feeling amazing and it's going to be 3 to 4 today, I think is really powerful. So thanks for sharing that one. I'm going to share a couple of insights from a track workout that I did the other day. And usually I'm not basing all my insights off one specific workout, but I would say that this workout was interesting enough that it was worth some insight. So I've been working with a new run coach, and that's been really fun. And we did a set of 8x400s on the track, which was very new to me. I'm someone who is usually doing more endurance-y workouts, but here we were really focusing on the kind of building some anaerobic power. So it was these 400-meter repeats, that's 1 lap, kind of as hard as I could sustain for each of those. And usually I'm used to kind of going out there, I'll do a little track, I'll do a little jog recovery in between. But in this workout, I was actually supposed to take a full recovery, like just standing there, kind of really bringing the heart rate down so I could bring all of my energy to the next one. That was something I really haven't done probably since high school. But I was really excited and impressed by how much more, you can really build speed when you're actually going to take full recovery. I think as endurance athletes, it's so easy to want to just like always run through every recovery and never really let your heart rate come down. But if you're interested in building some anaerobic power and speed, you need to be taking that recovery. And some days there's a time and a place. I mean, if we think about the goal of the workout, there is a time and a place for building endurance and kind of taking a more jog recovery and going longer, but we want to be working all these different systems. So I was really excited about that. And something else I picked up was, wow, I haven't done a workout like this since high school, and I'm actually faster than I was in high school, which is cool because I had all these times in my head from high school where I was focusing just on track. And it's nice to see that like 10 years later, without really much prep, I can just roll in and execute better than I could at that time with probably a much better approach to training as we've talked about. So that was all really cool. I'm excited to keep flexing kind of some more new muscles in this anaerobic kind of sprint training and then also be building endurance for my goal races this year. But yeah, excited to share insights as I continue to pick them up.
That's awesome. I need to get on the track more. It's something that I have just avoided, I think, for a bit because it feels so foreign. But to your point, it's just like nice to go mix it up and do something new and see how it feels compared to like the last time I did it was also probably high school. So
yeah, we should definitely do one together.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right, well, I think we're ready to get started. And I want to give a little bit of an intro for Justine. And I think it's kind of a funny story of how I got to know Justine. And I'm going to bring Jim into this because Jim has this ability to kind of stand on a pool deck and look at the pool and be able to pinpoint a triathlete from miles and miles away. So way back in 2019, I think we were training for Ironman Lake Placid. We were at the pool. And Jim saw someone swimming in lane 6 and was like, I think that's a triathlete over there. And that's a compliment. I mean, it's not like a bad thing, but there is something we can pick up about, say, a triathlon swimmer. And so Jim walked right over to lane 6 and said, hey, who are you? And it was Justine. And Justine was a student at the business school at Dartmouth at the time. I was doing research there. I'd graduated. And we kind of just brought her into our community because she was training for Ironman Mont Tremblant. And so we went from not really knowing her at all to having her join us for 3, 4, 5, 6-hour rides. And our races were right around the same time. And I think Elena and I have talked about this before, but it's really powerful how quickly you can get to know someone if you're just going to share like 6 hours on the bike with them, even if you hadn't spent that much time together before. So we got close pretty fast. She crushed it at Mont Tremblant. I had a good day at Placid. And then from there, we've kind of just continued to do a lot of really cool adventuring together. So we've done a lot of big trail running trips and bike trips, and it's just been fun to really build that over time. But the reason that we brought Justine on the podcast today is number one, because she has the coolest story ever as an athlete, and also because just this week, she ran the Boston Marathon, and in November, she gave birth to her first child. So I think it's a really cool story to just talk about that whole journey and then her broader journey as an athlete. So Justine, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we usually like to start these by asking our guests to tell us their story. And when we ask people to tell us their story, we're kind of focused on life, but also focused on your journey as an athlete. So if you want to kind of go back to whether it's childhood or high school and trace through the years to what got you to today, we'd love to start with that.
Sure. So going back, I grew up loving and playing a ton of different sports. And in high school, I played soccer, ice hockey, and lacrosse. And I loved kind of the team sports in the community. But I think when I look back now on my high school experience, it's not entirely surprising that I ended up in the endurance sports world today. So for soccer and lacrosse, we'd have run tests. So we do, 3-mile runs or the beep tests. And while I think almost everyone on the team hated these days, I genuinely loved them. Where I went to high school in New Hampshire also had incredible trails. So I think I really started to love running there. I didn't do a ton of it and I never competed as a runner, but I loved getting out on the trails and exploring. And then in college, I played ice hockey my freshman year. And then I switched to crew and rowed for the rest of my time in college. And I was new to rowing, but I saw kind of pretty clearly and quickly that it's a sport where you really got out of it what you put into it. And unlike some of the other sports that I had played, and I kind of maybe felt a little bit like I was hitting a bit of a plateau, at least hockey, I was a beginner and there was a pretty somewhat linear relationship between how hard I worked and the success that I saw in the sport. So I really loved kind of that beginner mindset and being new to something and seeing a ton of progress and improvement in a short period of time. I also kept running in college, like still recreationally, but our boathouse was 7 miles from campus. And while the team was carpooling to practice, I'd sometimes choose to run and loved just getting outside and clearing my head. And I ended up actually running my first marathon when I was in college. I saw in Runner's World magazine that the Mountain Desert Island Marathon was the most scenic marathon in America. And that wasn't too far from where I went to school. So I ended up running that. And I've been pretty involved with endurance sports since then. Post-college, I was living in Boston and I kept rowing with a club team. I also kept running. I was kind of doing 1 to 2 marathons a year. I also started biking. I'd gotten a road bike to do the Pan Mass Challenge, which is a fundraiser for being a barber in Boston. And it's kind of a natural transition into triathlons from there. I've done 3 Ironmans and I think a dozen or so marathons. And I think when I look ahead, I think endurance sports will kind of always be a part of my life, just in different ways, depending on kind of the season that I'm in. There are times when I prioritize training for something and other times where career or family stuff takes up more of my time. So I think I'll always be involved kind of in some way going forward.
Thanks, Justine. That is awesome to hear your initial story there. I also love that you were a hockey player in college, like also a first-year hockey player, and then I transitioned to other stuff and got into other sports. So I think I'm always just curious to hear how you think about the balance between these different kinds of sports. Hockey, you mentioned, you're feeling a little bit of plateau there. It's also like so different, and I can speak from experience. It's so different than endurance sports, and just curious how you thought about balancing those sports growing up and then made the decision to kind of focus in on endurance stuff later.
Growing up, I was never someone who was purely focused on one sport. It wasn't necessarily intentional, but there was always kind of different seasons where I was focused on different sports. And I think I honestly probably would have just burned out sooner if I was really focused on one thing. I liked the variety of it. And then even now, I think the same thing holds true. Like, I really love training for triathlons because I love the balance of having the three sports. And I do find like, as much as I don't really like swimming, I find my body actually really appreciates it. And when I'm doing really high volume of training, having the balance and having that variety, I think physically really helps me and also mentally gives me more of a break. And even if I am like more focused on, say, a marathon and doing more running, I don't think I'm ever exclusively doing that. And I do really appreciate kind of having that balance. And I do think it does really help me stay healthy.
I love that. Yeah, I think we always speak to the power of cross training, and triathlon is great because it just is inherently cross training. But I think when I think about your journey too, you've also infused like so many cool random adventures and everything. I remember when you backpacked from Hanover, New Hampshire to the end of the Appalachian Trail. That's probably something we could get into. But zooming out to this whole journey, you know, all the things you've done, do any particularly formative training or racing experiences stand out to you that like you just think have really shaped your identity or career as an athlete?
For sure. I think races, like, yes, there are absolutely incredible races along the way, but what stands out to me the most are really kind of those adventures that have been kind of informally part of the training. I think I've always been someone who's genuinely loved the process and the journey of getting to the race. And with that, I think I'm also not one to strictly kind of follow a training plan. So I use them as a guide and I appreciate them, but I have no problem setting like a big hike for a long run if I'm in a training cycle. So that said, I think the days where I've had, you know, Katie, we've done a ton of these together, but like big hikes in the White Mountains or the land rides in Vermont or some of those big kind of backpacking trips, those adventures to me with friends are what are the most memorable. And I think like the more character building that happens on those adventures, I think the better and the more fun.
Totally agreed. I very much resonate with like, if you can do an adventure with friends as opposed to a long run, like sure, sub it in. It's just nice to get on your feet and do something exciting. Curious to hear, because you mentioned you met, I didn't realize this before, but you met when you were at Tech Business School and training for an Ironman. How did you think about, like, I know that can be a really intense experience. How did you think about like having these huge blocks of training while also being really heads down in grad school and balancing that approach of like, this is important to me, it's worth it for me to put all my effort into this right now while this other stuff is going on in my life?
It's funny to think of that way. I kind of had like the opposite approach where I decided to train for an Ironman when I knew I was going to business school. Because when I looked at like when I was working full time before, I didn't feel like I had as much time to train versus when I knew I was going to school, I felt like I had a lot more flexibility in my schedule. That said, I did my first Ironman in 2018, which was my first year at business school. And I think the Ironman was like in the fall at some point. And I ended up leaving my job like a few months before I started business school to travel and just kind of have a little bit of downtime, but then also to train. So I kind of had this like little bit of a down period. And then, yes, I had a couple months of overlap training, but I found in business school, I actually had more time than I did when I was working full time to train.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's true. You have some more like chunks of time to put stuff in.
Yeah, and we'll probably come back to the balance conversation too and talking about now balancing training with being a mom. But maybe to tee up that conversation, could you tell us kind of where you were at in 2022? What was training and racing looking like for you at that time?
Yeah, so 2022, that was an awesome and also kind of crazy life year. In January, got engaged, bought a house a couple months later, moved into said house, had some tough kind of family stuff going on as well, and then got married in November. So it was a little bit of a whirlwind of a year. I had also run the Boston Marathon in 2022 and then qualified to run it again in 2023. We went on our honeymoon in New Zealand in January of 2023. And then I remember thinking at the time, I was like, wow, 2022 was a crazy year. I'm excited to kind of like have a more chill 2023.
And is that what happened? What happened in 2023? Just
So in some ways it was more quiet, but we also found out we were expecting our first kid in November of 2023, or he was due in November of 2023. So it was crazy, but in very good and exciting way.
Totally. And I think not everyone may know this, but maybe we could talk a little bit about first your personal decision about racing Boston or not that year in 2023, but also this policy, because I believe it was the first year in 2023 where they allowed people to defer due to pregnancy. If you could just tell us through kind of what you learned about that and that decision that you made.
Yeah. So I had been training for Boston in 2023. I found out I was pregnant. I right, February. So I knew I was going to be, I think around like 12 weeks or so pregnant at the time of the race. So I went in thinking like, I think I could probably still run it if everything goes well, but I ended up having some complications in my first trimester and wasn't able to exercise intensely because of that. So just kind of like light exercise, and my OB advised against doing the marathon. So I think it was a really big decision for me. It was kind of like I knew I wasn't going to be able to run it. But thankfully, as you pointed out, that was the first year that Boston had the pregnancy deferral policy, which allowed anyone who is pregnant or within 6 months postpartum to defer their entry to one of the 2 following years. So for me, deferred in 2023, meaning I could run in 2024 or 2025 without having to requalify. So, and you don't need to decide at the time. So for me, I think I had until like February of 2024. So like up until 2 months before the race, I can make a decision if I wanted to run, which is nice. And if you don't choose that, you just automatically get pushed to the next year and you'll get another email offering to register for that year.
I love that they actually give you that choice, because you really don't know where you're going to be. Would you say that like when you decided you were going to defer, did you have it in the back of your mind that you'd like to run at what would be like 5 months postpartum, or were you really just kind of leaving it up to how you're going to feel?
I think it was in the back of my mind, but also just kind of like having talked to friends who had been through it, I realized a lot of it was outside of my control, just in terms of like how my postpartum recovery was going. And my first priority is kind of like longevity and sport in life. So I didn't want to do anything that was going to jeopardize me longer term from like an injury, from a physical like well-being perspective. So I was kind of like, hey, if there is a chance that I could do this, if I'm healthy enough to do it, I would love to. So it was in the back of my mind in that sense. But I also didn't want to put a lot of pressure on myself to like run it if I, things were going well or wasn't feeling up to running.
Yeah, I love how you say that longevity in sport and life is like a huge priority of yours. I think that resonates with us as well. Very curious then, like knowing that this is like a huge, I mean, you've mentioned this before, sports are such a huge part of your life through that pregnancy period. I mean, Katie and I have not been pregnant, and it's something I wonder about often of how did you feel your body adjusting? How did you think about movement or activity? Or was it something that wasn't even really part of your consideration through your pregnancy and postpartum period before getting back into training?
I mean, yeah, I think like sports and training have always been such a huge part of my life. So I was hoping that I would be able to do it. But at the same time, I wasn't having any expectation that I was going to be able to. And I think it was it's a mindset that I had during pregnancy and also when I was training for this race, because I didn't want to have this mindset where I was expecting to be able to do it and then felt like something was taken away from me when I couldn't. And rather was this kind of approaching it with this like gratitude for what I was able to do. So during my pregnancy, I was thankful, like after that complication in the first trimester, that really cleared up. And then I was able to do, I wouldn't say I trained my full pregnancy, but up until probably like 7 or 8 months where I just felt like very large and uncomfortable, I was able to kind of keep running and keep biking. And it was over the summer. So I was definitely kind of pulling back intensity and volume. And I didn't have any goals, but it did feel good to keep moving. So I did kind of keep doing that, which I was super kind of grateful and appreciative for, which I think also definitely made that kind of return to exercise postpartum easier because I was been able to kind of like maintain some level of exercise throughout my pregnancy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's awesome, especially like not having expectations, but just listening to your body, like we say often, and following through on that. When you got back into training then, what did training look like for this postpartum marathon 5 months after giving birth? How did that look for you?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I think he was born in November. I think like the first month, it wasn't even on my mind. Like some days even you think about it, do I go for a run, do I not? Like it wasn't even on my radar. Having a newborn, it's amazing, but it's also you're just like straight in survival mode. Taking care of yourself and your baby are like the first priority. And I think I was grateful that I had a relatively uncomplicated kind of delivery, so I didn't have any kind of like lingering things from that. So I think from a physical perspective, like I did feel pretty good. And I think it was probably a month, maybe 6 weeks after he was born, I had been getting out for walks, taking our dog out for walks. And I think I was taking Abby for a walk one day and then was like, you know what, Big Mama should like run a few steps. So I think that's kind of like how it started, was just jogging, like honestly, like 30 seconds and kind of slowly building that up. And it's crazy because you go from doing something your whole life and then you just, at least for me, like I felt so unathletic those first few steps that I was taking, like regardless of speed. I was not wearing a watch, not doing anything, but just like you're used to running feeling a certain way. And then it felt so different. Like I didn't feel like I was moving in the same way. And not that I was in pain, but it's just like, wow, I don't feel like an athlete. But it is crazy to think how quickly that kind of improved. And those kind of, short little jogs got progressively a little bit longer, did a little bit of run walking, and then, was able to string some runs together. And I honestly didn't know, it probably wasn't until maybe early March that I was like, okay, I think I could actually do Boston, because training had been going pretty well. But I think a big reason that I was able to run it was I had found coming back to running was having a little bit of like hip discomfort and just didn't quite feel right, and ended up finding a house. I mean, I'd done pelvic floor PT, and they were like, yeah, everything's good from kind of a pelvic floor perspective, but we could probably benefit from like orthopedic PT focused on strength. And I think for me, that was what enabled me to be able to run pain-free, run in a healthy way. And that was something that I really prioritized in my recovery. So yes, I was running, but I was also doing kind of this focused strength training a couple times a week as well.
And I'm going to jump in here because I remember early March, I think we went for a run together. It might have been end of February, early March. And you asked me if I wanted to run on a Saturday morning. And I was like, I have a 10-mile run on the calendar. And I was guessing you were going to say like, oh, I'm going to run 5 or 6. Like I can tag on for part of that. And you ran 18 miles that day and I ran 10. And that 10 was hard for me. And you absolutely blew out of the water. So I think I knew in that moment too, like she's going to absolutely smash it at Boston, which was really, really exciting.
Funny you bring up that specific run, because I don't feel like I had good runs, I had bad runs in the training cycle. I don't put any like too much weight in any one day. But I do remember that one day, because I remember finishing that 18-miler and feeling good at the end of it and being like, yeah, I could run Boston. And that was kind of a turning point for me.
Yeah, well, how cool for me to get to be there. That was really, really special. I guess this does bring us to race day. So I saw you on course just a few days ago and you looked amazing, but I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, a race recap. How was your mindset going into it? Was it a fun day? Did you feel good? Just take us through the whole experience.
Yeah, I think going into it, I was so grateful and so appreciative that I could make it to the starting line. I know people say that like, oh, like I just want to, get to the race healthily and finish the race. I genuinely really, really felt that way this time, like truly had, as much as I maybe have said that in other races of like, oh, like I don't really care what my time is or anything like that. Like I probably have in the back of my mind something where I'd be, oh, well, I'd be happy if I ran X time. I truly didn't have any of that this time, was really just wanted to soak it all in and be appreciative that I could be there with a 5-month-old. Like that in itself to me was really the victory. And I think like I really felt that as I was running. And I think it was a little bit ironic. I remember the morning of the race, we lived somewhere like near the middle of the marathon course. So I was just going to Uber up to the start line. And I remember getting in the Uber and getting a couple miles away from home. And I forgot my watch at home. And I was texting my husband, I was like, oh, do you want me to drop it off to you? And I was like, nope, like I'm good. I don't need it. I don't always remember my watch. I usually do. But during a race, I definitely would for sure. And I was kind of like laughing at myself because I was like, it's kind of symbolic of a sense that like I truly don't care about my time. A watch would have been helpful just to make sure I didn't go out too fast. But I was like, I can just run this one and enjoy it. So yeah, I was really just grateful to be there. And it was an awesome day. Was able to kind of like run the whole race. I was happy about. I had like occasionally some lingering hip pain during training. Didn't have any of that during the race. The crowds were unbelievable. And yeah, I think I'm still just super happy that I was able to do it.
Huge congrats. That's just so awesome. And to hear your mental headspace, it feels like a bit of a flow state when you're not concerned with your watch or your time and you're just like riding the energy of everyone. Maybe contributes to that feeling of not having any pain or flowing. I just think that's really cool to hear your experience with that. Were there any like low points? What if you have to say like a high and low of the race, what would you describe as your high and low?
The high, my husband was with Leo at the top of Heartbreak Hill, and I had seen Katie a couple of times right around there as well. And that stretch kind of in Newton is where I do a ton of my training runs as well. So that kind of stretch from like mile 18 to 21 was just incredible. And I know in prior, like I've run Boston a couple of times, and I know that in the past has been a very tough part of the race for me. Like I don't even remember thinking that I was going uphill at the time. I never thought about walking. I was just like so happy to see people there. So I think that was a high point. And then getting to the finish line, taking that lesson on Boylston Street and seeing the finish line there, that's always just so magical and special. But I think that was a highlight as well. Honestly, I feel like the fact that I have to pause and think about a low point, I don't even know. It was such an incredible day. There was a new part of the race where I usually in most races, I've had some point where I've like felt really low or really had to dig deep mentally, or I was in some pain physically. Like I didn't have that this time around. So yeah, I'm not trying to dodge a question. I just generally don't have a low point of the day.
No, that's awesome. That's the sign of a great race. Would you say that's your best race then? You said you run Boston a few times. Is that like by far your happiest one?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different, right? Like I had such a different why this time around. So I think each Boston, every race is kind of like memorable for its own reasons. I think this one will hold a very special place because Leo is 5 months old. And I think that's something that's really special about it. I think I've been other races where they've absolutely been like faster, not that time matters, but like other races where I ran fast and also felt good. But I think good races and in very different races.
I love that. Well, congratulations. You're just so inspiring and so awesome. And I could tell like you were smiling the whole way out there. So I could definitely tell that you're having a great day. I wondered if you could talk, we're going to shift gears a little bit to a different topic that we talk about a lot on this podcast and we alluded to before, but can we talk a little bit about balance as a new mom? You know, how you've been balancing training for Boston with now I think you've just gone back to work. So that's busy. And, you know, you do a lot of things in life. So how do you think about that? And do you think balance is a myth, which is something that we talk about quite a bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think I struggle with the concept of work-life balance. Like what does balance mean? It's not a 50-50 split. I think each person individually, like you set your priorities and then you structure your life in such a way around those priorities. And those priorities can evolve, or they do evolve over time. But I think if you're realistic with yourself on what you want to accomplish and how you want to spend your time, you certainly can have balance, and that's going to look different to every person. But I think if you think that balance means that you're giving 100% to your family and to your career and to your friends and to your training, like you're not setting yourself up for success. But if you know what you want to achieve, I think you could approach that in a balanced way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious then for you talk about balance evolving. I think we both feel that often. Like how has your priorities evolved with, I've had a kid, I trained for the Boston Marathon and I'm starting my work again. And now things look a lot different for me. Where are you right now in that evolution?
Yes. So I think back to when I was training for most of the marathons, I was on maternity leave. I went back to work the week before the marathon started. So for most of it, I was not working. So I had a lot of time and was able to train. And Leo was sleeping a lot. So often would try to we have a treadmill in our basement, so I could get in runs while he was sleeping. We also had a part-time nanny who was helping for a few weeks. So when she was here, I was able to get out. People say like it takes a village. It really does. And then I would do a lot of long runs on Saturday morning, and my husband would spend time with Leo. So it wasn't just me who was getting myself to the starting line. It was a ton of other people that really kind of helped me get there. So yeah, I think when I was training for Boston, well, obviously like Leo's priority always will be, and I think family comes first. And I didn't have work that I had to balance at the time too. So I think in that sense, I did have a little bit more flexibility. I think this is, week 2 back at work for me. So I think I'm very much still kind of figuring out how that is going to look like in the future. So I'm not sure, but I think I was blessed to have a lot of time on leave when I was training for the race.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool that you're in the midst of this transition too and figuring it out, because that's kind of like a constant life state too of just like moving through and changing your priorities, et cetera. So thanks for sharing.
And on that, now as you're in this new chapter, you're back at work. How are you thinking about kind of your next goals on the horizon? Are you excited about other endurance goals? Are you really excited about spending time with Leo and being home, the unstructured adventures? Talk us through kind of what's coming next for you.
Yeah, there's nothing like on the calendar from a training perspective. I might put something on at some point if I'm excited by it. But I think right now, I think Leo's at a super fun age and just excited to kind of keep seeing a picture the other day of like him in his little hiking backpack. So I think we're excited to kind of get out with him this summer. And TBD, what's next on the training front? There's a QOM by my house that I really have had my eyes set on for a while. So that is my goal for 2024 summer. I think it's a 2.5-3 minute climb, and I'm like 30 seconds away. So we got some work to do, but it's a fun little goal to have.
Love that you're Strava hunting this summer. That's so awesome. Anything else that you're excited for generally in 2024 apart from training? Just like what does the rest of the year look like for you?
Yeah, I think just like spending more time with family. And I think, like Leo's like just getting every day, I feel like he's able to do more than he was the day before. So just kind of like watching him kind of grow up and explore the world. That's honestly what I'm most excited about right now.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that it reflects too how like our goals and priorities do shift, and the things that get us really excited do shift over time, where sometimes you can be so zeroed in on like the only thing I care about is my Ironman race. And then it's like, maybe I'm going to get a QOM, but also my kid's growing up. And that's so much more important, which is really awesome. I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap. Just talking about pregnancy in general, is there anything that you wish people had told you, especially from an athletic perspective, about pregnancy before you went through it that we could share with our listeners?
I think for pregnancy specifically, I think it's tough because there isn't you find yourself kind of searching for like, what is the rule book, or what is the like, tell me what I can and can't do. And the reality is like, that doesn't really exist. And just having talked to friends who have gone through pregnancy, and everyone's experience is so different. But even from like, if you say like, oh, I'm going to ask my OB like what I can and can't do. And even different OBs have different levels of conservatism on what is acceptable and what's not. So you really end up being kind of like, when people say, listen to your body, like, you know what's best, that really was the reality of it for me. Is no one's going to tell you like, oh, you stop running at this point, stop biking at this point. You really just have to do what feels best for you, and you kind of advocate and you know for yourself. So it's a shitty thing to hear, but that is the reality of it. And maybe that'll change in the future. But I found that I did a lot of kind of like my own navigating in that path. And then I would say postpartum, and I didn't explicitly ask, but I think the first thing that came to mind for me that I felt kind of like caught off guard by how difficult it was breastfeeding. And I don't know, I think maybe I just naively thought ahead of time, and this might be the case for some people, but it was kind of an afterthought for me. I was like, oh, you just feed your baby. Like, that's just, you don't really need to, they just eat. And that was something that was a super, super hard journey for me. And maybe I should have been more educated going into it, but that was one piece that I felt was super, super challenging.
Yeah, no, those are really helpful to hear. I also would probably be the same naive. That seems easy, pretty straightforward. Just feed your baby. There was something that you were saying there that I wanted to just maybe dig a little bit more on. You just seem like you have such a good control over listening to your body and navigating that, and I really admire that from you. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to how you do that. Like, what are some of the signs for you that you need to pull it back, or how have you kind of honed that over time?
I've honestly think I've kind of always been that way. And I thankfully, like, knock on wood, I've never had like any big injuries through training for anything. And I think part of it comes back to this balance that we were talking about earlier of always kind of like doing multiple sports and having that variety. At least for me, like my body physically responds better to that. Like when I've usually felt that I was like closest to injury was probably when I was purely focused on training for like just a marathon or something like that. But I do feel like I know my body pretty well and know when like the littlest thing feels off. And when I have that, I like automatically pull back. Like I don't have any guilt or any reservations around like, oh, I'm missing a day, I'm taking time off. It's like, nope, no questions asked, we'll pull back. And I think knowing kind of like what help to ask for too, like when you need it as well, I think has been helpful. And I think like I mentioned earlier, that PT that I saw while training for Boston, it was my first time going him, but thought he was incredible. Not to mention when I was on, before we had any help or anything at home, I was with Leo full time, and I was like, oh, how can I go to a PT appointment? And he has a kid of his own. He's like, bring your kid to the appointment. And I brought him to many appointments with me, and he would take Leo and hold him if he was crying during my appointment, and somehow be like coaching me through strength training moves, and also like holding Leo or feeding him or doing whatever needs to be done. So yeah, getting back to your question, I think it's just kind of like advocating for yourself. And I think I've kind of been that way throughout my journey in sport.
I love that. Yeah, I can attest to how good you are at that. We've done a lot of long multi-day things together, and I feel like you have this like internal sense of like, this is how we need to pace it. This is how we need to do it. And that's why I really enjoy training together and adventuring together, because it's very grounding to have that experience. Our last question that we usually end with is, do you have any favorite books or podcasts that you can recommend for our listeners?
I'm currently deep in the parenting phase. So I don't know if it's the right demographic for your audience, but you never know. There's the Dr. Becky Good Inside. She has the book and a podcast, and that's something that I've been listening to a lot lately, just thinking about like how to approach conflict with kids and how you address that. And that's been something I've been really enjoying.
I love that. And I think it is very relevant. I think our audience is either like parents or eventually will be parents or no parents. So I hope that we've had a pretty wide demographic that's been listening to this. And just want to say thank you so much, Justine, for sharing everything here. I think it's really relatable and really inspiring at the same time. So we're so excited for you. And I just think you're the coolest ever. And my favorite thing about this podcast is bringing on my friends who are super cool. So thank you so, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So to close us out, I think we'll do our favorite segment, which is Gear Pick of the Week. And Justine, we might put you on the spot and let you join us for Gear Pick of the Week if there's any favorite gear that you have. But my Gear Pick of the Week is it's getting sunny out. It is spring and I'm so excited about it, but that means we need good sun protection. And so I'm a huge fan of Supergoop sunscreen. It's really, really good for training and I wear it all the time and they have a lot of different types. So you should definitely be caring about sun protection as an athlete and I'm going to recommend that sunscreen.
Man, okay, I was also on the theme of sun protection because I have been feeling it and I'm really bad at putting on like sunscreen in general, especially face sunscreen because I just hate the feeling of like oily sunscreen on my face. So the other one that I really like is Trader Joe's has a face sunscreen and it's so good. It's just like really matte and it doesn't feel like that oily on my face and it's really simple. So that's one for me, but then not to be over sunscreened on our Gear Picks of the Week, I'll also share that I have these sunglasses that are Smith's, and I'll probably have to find the link and put it in our show notes because I don't know the actual name of the brand, but they're like Smith mountain biking glasses, and they're one of those ones that are kind of like the Pit Viper-y kind, like across the face, but the way that they fit my face just feels so much better than other ones, and they're a little more molded and have some like more comfortable rubber, but they're great sunglasses, and I use them for all my adventures.
Maybe I need to try those because I have glasses that I like for cycling, but I really struggle to find ones that I like for running that I feel like I want to feel like I don't know that they're there. And every pair of glasses I were to run like bounces around on my face and just doesn't feel right.
I love that. Yeah. Justine, would you like to join us for a Gear Pick of the Week also? It can be sun related or not sun related at all.
Yeah, I don't have anything sun related, but I do have snack related. And my husband turned me on to these. They're owl bars and I make fun of him because he just likes anything that's made in Vermont. But these are made in Vermont. They like taste like something that you would make yourself if you had time to do that, which I would like to think that I do, but I know that I don't. So they're original flavor owl bar, awesome like bite snack or just like all around snack. Keep them in my car and the diaper bag, really just everywhere.
We love anything Vermont and we've recommended like probably at least 20% of our Gear Picks of the Week have been Vermont items.
Yeah, I also love all the food from Vermont. So that makes sense to me. I'm going to have to get this.
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Justine. We really loved having you today. And thanks for sharing your insights. And we'll definitely catch up with you again soon.